Greetings, mighty companions, and welcome back to Transforming Relationships Through A Course in Miracles with the Quins, the mighty Quins.
Yes,
Anna
the
and
mighty
Greg.
Quins. Come on within.
come on within with the mighty Quins.
Yes.
All right, so like what we always do in our classes, Sundays and Tuesdays, is we ask the Spirit to decide for us where in A Course in Miracles that we study, knowing that the Spirit knows exactly what we need to hear all the time, and it knows what anybody watching at any time needs to hear. And then we let Spirit choose for us through the random number generator, and what it shows, and then we take whatever it comes up with, and then we apply it to our relationship and all of our relationships, and then we hopefully can be helpful in helping you to do the same. Apply it, excuse me, to your relationships as well. So that's what we do on Sundays and Tuesdays. And what we came up with, or what came through us today, was Chapter 7, Section 7, the ego's use of projection. Dun, dun, dun. So in this section, it talks about how the mind works, how the mind operates, and then how does the mind operate under love's use, when love is using the mind, and then how does the mind work when the ego is utilizing the mind and the laws of mind. So we're going to talk about the laws of mind, right? So.
Okay, so in the blue book, the title is The Unbelievable Belief.
Okay, and what chapter is it? Same chapter?
And it seemed like because this one doesn't have numbers,
right?
Old edition, but it seemed like I counted like 7 or 8.
Okay.
So it's going to be around there.
In chapter 7.
Yeah, around 7 or 8.
Okay, all right.
But the name of it is The Unbelievable Belief.
Okay, great. So chapter 7, section 7, in the blue book, The Unbelievable Belief. And in the original edition, it's going to be chapter 7, section 7, and it's called The Ego's Use of Projection.
And it might not be the same
section, right? It might not be the same section.
Yeah.
So hi Irene, hi Alita, hi Bridget, lovely to see you all. Lovely to see you all. So we're going to be talking about the laws of the mind and how the mind works, and how the mind works when love's using the mind, and how the laws of the mind work when the ego's using those laws of mind. Two very different results. All right. So here we go. The ego's use of projection, or the unbelievable belief. That's unbelievable.
That's
exactly.
Unbelievable that
exactly.
you could have a belief like that.
Exactly. It says, we once said that without projection, there can be no anger. What? Wait a minute. That's a very strong sentence to begin a section with.
Yeah.
Without projection, there can be no anger. But it is also true that without extension, there can be no love. So love is something that comes from extension, and anger is something that comes from projection. Okay, good to know. Now, extension is a fundamental law of mind. What does that mean? That is a fundamental law of mind, that mind goes out. Mind extends. That's just mind cannot be contained. Mind is going to extend. It's going to go out. It's going to go forth. Mind is not something that is static and contained. Mind is something that is always extending. That's a fundamental law of the mind, what it is and how it works. And so that means, since it's a fundamental law of mind, that means it is a law of the mind which always operates. The mind is always extending. It's always sharing. That's what the mind does.
That's why we're always seeing things. In our waking time, we're seeing things through what we call projection. In our sleeping time, what we call our sleeping time, we see things through what we call dreams. they're both the same thing.
Projection.
Is projection what we think is happening outside of us.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, it's all happening in our mind.
That's right. Exactly. And this fundamental law of mind, which is extension, this is the fundamental law by which you create, and it's the fundamental law of mind by which you were created. So you also create from your mind by extension, and you being extended from God's mind is how you were created. So it's fundamental law of mind, which is always operating. It's how you create, and it's how you were created. We were extended from God's mind, and we extend, our mind extends and creates like we were created. Extension is a fundamental law of mind. Okay, great. Now, the fundamental law of the mind called extension is the law which unifies reality and keeps reality in the mind of God. So what keeps reality in God's mind? Because God is always extending. God is always extending reality. So the way God keeps reality in God's mind is God's always extending reality. So how does God keep reality? God is always extending reality. How does God keep love in God's mind? God's always extending love. And it says, and to the ego, extension is the law of projection. And to the ego, extension is perceived as just a way of getting rid of something that the ego does not want. And so the mind's going to extend. And now love extends to keep love going. And the ego extends to get rid of something it doesn't want. Okay, but still extension going on both ways.
Yeah, one's shoveling manure and
right. And the other one's creating more love.
One's taking the manure and planting flowers.
Exactly. Beautiful. Well said. It says, now to spirit, extension is the fundamental law of sharing. And what is the fundamental law of sharing? That's the law by which you give what you value in order to keep it in your own mind. So that's what God does. God extends love. God extends reality to keep love in God's own mind. And that's the way love creates. That's the way God creates. Right? And so that's the way God creates. God's like, I give what I want to keep in my own mind.
And you got to realize, we seem to need to realize sooner or later, this whole concept of, that boring one about how I only get what I give. In other words, whatever I give, I get back. Well, God came up with that law.
Yeah, God created that law.
God put that law into place. Mm-hmm. And the law works. And the law works for God. So God's only going to extend through God's mind what God wants to keep, what God wants back. God would not, it doesn't even make sense by God's own principle that you get what you give, that God would give punishment and wrath and torment based on God's own law, that wrath, torment, and punishment would come back on the God. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly right.
So one is right and one is wrong, and I'm going to side with the way that God does it, because God is a happy God. God is a joyful God. God's a content God, and God is all of these things because that's what God gives away all the time. And so God's going to give that away in God's mind. God's not going to give deprivation away, because God's not going to want deprivation.
Exactly. And so the fundamental law of sharing is giving is the way that you keep something. That's the fundamental law of mind. It's the fundamental law of creating. It's the fundamental law of sharing. Whatever you give away, you're going to keep in your own mind.
Get ready to drink it.
Right. And
in your own experience of your own mind.
Exactly. And the ego is using the same fundamental law.
Yep.
And so, but the ego, what it wants to keep is conflict.
Right.
And so the ego only gives conflict. It only extends or projects conflict because that's the only way to keep conflict going in the ego's mind.
Wants to keep it.
Exactly.
So it knows it has to give it.
The only way to keep something is to give it. When you give something, that's how you keep it. And so spirit just wants to keep love in its mind, and ego just wants to keep conflict in its mind, so the ego is always projecting conflict.
Yeah, think how silly that we've been taught to do things. We, like Anna and I, have quote unquote a conflict, right? And where does the conflict always, 100% all the time start?
With me?
Good answer, baby.
Yeah, that's right. Good answer.
No, it always starts in the mind.
That's right.
It starts in the mind of what they did, what they said,
Right.
And so it starts in the mind.
It starts in our mind.
And so that's where this conflict starts. And so we think to get rid of what we don't want is to give more of it. And so when Anna comes walking in the room, what do I give? I give her some conflict.
Some guilt.
Some conflict. And that way it ensures and guarantees that I will keep conflict, because conflict now will come back to me. What I gave, you receive. You receive as you give. You receive as you give. You receive as you give.
And then the ego's happy.
And I love how you brought the circle around to connect this. That the ego, wants it, for what it's fighting for, it knows, oh, God has this universal law that you keep what you give. And so that's why God only gives love, because God only wants love. And God only gives it, and God only is it. And therefore that's why God is love, because that's all God gives.
Yes.
And the ego's like, I don't want that. I want something different. I want to experience something different. I will give conflict. And then I'll get conflict. And I'll experience something that God never experiences, because God never gives that.
Right. And
so I'll experience something God doesn't ever experience. Wouldn't that make me great?
And that's perfect, because the ego wants to be God. The ego wants to replace God. So that's perfect. So whatever is the opposite.
Whatever makes the ego and the ego's concept greater than God, the ego wants to implement.
Exactly. And the ego, which is a belief system that we have adopted into our mind, that's what the ego is. The ego, our ego only has one need, and it only has one need, and that is to preserve conflict. That's all the ego wants.
It eats on conflict.
That's its food.
When you're in your kitchen with your partner, and you're having one of those, conflicting conversations, the ones. And imagine if you can remember this in that moment, that Greg and Anna were sitting with you, right in that moment, and they said, remember that the ego is it's like a devouring piranha right now in the room. It's just eating away at this flesh of conflict. You're just throwing
you're feeding it
meat into the shark pond. They're going crazy, bloodthirsty crazy, because you're feeding it
conflict
with this conflict.
Exactly.
The conflict is keeping the conflict going.
Exactly.
Giving Anna conflict when she walks in the room that started in my mind is not going to get rid of the conflict.
That's right.
It's going to obviously make sure the conflict is going to continue, because now she's going to be triggered, and now she's going to react, defend, attack back to the conflict. And now that, because she feeds it with conflict, you can see how
it preserves it.
The house stays on fire and keeps burning and burning and burning.
Right.
Because we're just pouring more gasoline, which is the conflict. which is the guilt, which is the blame,
which is the ego's goal.
Anything that causes conflict. Guilt causes conflict. Judgment causes conflict.
Yep.
All these tools that the ego thinks it has, they're all for one purpose.
Anytime you are projecting something to get rid of it, okay? So let's say you're feeling a feeling that doesn't feel good. Your ego says, blame it on them, which is the same as saying project it on them. The ego tells you, blame that negative feeling on them, and you'll get rid of that bad feeling. If you could just blame them for the bad feeling that you have, you'll get rid of that bad feeling. You know, the worst advice ever, you know, the worst advice you will ever receive is when your ego tells you that the best way to get rid of the feeling you don't like is to blame it on somebody else. You know, the ego will never tell you, hey, go blame this feeling on them. It'll never tell you, hey, blame them for it so that we can keep this bad feeling going. You know, the ego always says, blame them for the negative feeling you're feeling, and you'll get rid of that feeling, and they'll be the one feeling that bad feeling. You know, but it will never tell you, hey, blame it on them so that I can keep this bad feeling going in your own mind. You know, and so the ego is using you. The ego wants to use you.
The ego wants you to be its little bitch.
Exactly. The ego wants to use you to keep it going, to keep it fed and alive. And only if you say, okay, that's great advice, ego. I'll blame somebody else for what I'm feeling right now, and then I'll feel better. You know, only if you say yes to that and let the ego use you to keep its own conflict going, only then that's the only way the ego can stay alive. That's the only way the conflict can stay alive. But if you say, no, I'm not falling for that.
Because if you stop giving conflict, then you'll stop receiving conflict.
Exactly.
The universal law, you know, the train will start, those wheels will start turning the other way instead of going fast down the track this way.
Right.
All of a sudden you stop giving conflict. So you stop using the tools of the ego to keep it breathing.
Right.
Which is guilt, shame, blame, judgment, all that stuff. You know what works.
Projection. Anger.
And then the wheels start slowing down on the train.
Yeah.
And then they start backing up. Backing up. And what's the backing up? The backing up is, I love how Anna told me it felt so great. I mean, it really brought me some peace when I told her, wow, baby, I realized that I gave you something that I didn't feel good about. And it's not the act of, you know, was found out. It was the realization that you get back what you gave. And boy, that scares the heck out of me sometimes, thinking about what I've given. But Anna, you know, brings back to my remembrance of through the Course that when we use forgiveness, that's why we're trying to use forgiveness, then we break that curse of, okay, I threw 10 swords and I have 10 swords coming back at me. Oh, shoot, why did now I realize what I'm doing. Oh, shoot, you know, I could have handled that situation better. That was, I see now that was actually Spirit working in that situation. I got ahead of myself and started judging it. And when you start doing forgiveness,
which is correct perception,
another way to look at it, then the 10 arrows that were coming back at you, it's like in the movie The Matrix, at the end of that one show where he puts his hands up, he finally realizes he has this power. And the power is to break the curse of that bullet coming back at him. Even though he shot a lot of bullets at other people.
That's a fantastic metaphor. So the way that love is using the law of mind is, love says, I give the love and the peace and the joy and the appreciation that I want to keep. And the way the ego uses the law of the mind is the ego's like, I'm going to get rid of what I don't want and blame it on somebody else, thinking that I'm getting rid of it.
Right.
You know, but really that only preserves the conflict.
They want to make sure that I keep it.
Exactly. And so it says, so to spirit, this is the fundamental law of sharing by which you give what you value in order to keep what you value in your own mind. That's how spirit uses the laws of mind. Whatever I want to keep, I'm going to give. I'm going to share that. You know, and the ego's like, oh yeah, what I don't want, which is this conflict, this uncomfortable feeling, I'm going to blame it. I'm going to project it onto others so I can keep it, says the ego. So it says to spirit, this is the law of extension. To the ego, it is the law of deprivation. Woo! So spirit is using the law of mind for extension and keeping, and ego is using the law of mind to deprive. If I deprive them, then I will have something for myself.
The ego's got us convinced that if we get rid of something, then because we're separate, you know, if I give Anna some guilt, you know, I get rid of this, I throw it at her, this slab of guilt, she catches it, and I think I got rid of something, not realizing that 50-pound bag of guilt that I threw, a 50-pound Ivan guaranteed a 50-pound bag coming back at me.
Yes, exactly.
And you can see how the ego's always coming up with a creative way, you know, to keep itself alive, keep itself going, to keep its existence fundamentally in our experience.
Exactly.
And we're moving our way out of that system. It's like the fiat currency is crashing, or the world of the ego is crashing.
Exactly. And the ego is a parasite. And as a parasite, the ego can only live off of conflict. You know, it's like a tick that requires your blood to keep it alive. The ego is a parasite that requires your conflict to keep it alive. And so the ego only has one need, and that's to preserve conflict, to keep it giving itself its lifeblood called conflict. You know, the ego is a conflict parasite living off of the conflict that you allow, that you experience.
And that's why I said earlier, when we find ourselves in the conflict, you know the one, whether it's in the kitchen or wherever it is, at work, wherever that conflict is. You know, I had a big conflict last night, a real big one. There's no way I could see how it couldn't be a conflict. It had to be a conflict.
It couldn't be good.
Yeah, and you know, I really had to battle like I'm not crazy, like I was in warfare to get using truth to ambush my way out of there. But it makes sense, because by the time I went to bed, I honestly went to bed feeling restful, feeling peaceful, actually having gratitude, being thankful for a lot of things. And it was through ambushing with this, you know, sword of truth at all of the conflict that was rushing through my mind, of using spiritual application truth to end the conflict, because the conflict was like little tiny matches coming up to a waterfall, thinking it's going to disintegrate the water of this waterfall, when it's going to be instantly snuffed out. And it's going to be made to look silly that the conflict coming to the truth is going to survive. Where our problem is the conflict comes and we forget to bring the sword,
match to the waterfall.
Yeah, the sword of truth to snuff out the match, which is the little conflict.
Right.
And go, what were you talking about?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Are you having a bad hair day?
And so the law of mind that we're talking about, which is that the law that mind extends, mind goes forth, that mind cannot be contained, that law of mind therefore produces either abundance or scarcity, depending on how you choose to use the law of mind.
Right.
You know, that's the law. The mind goes forth. The mind cannot be contained. Same thing as saying your thoughts go forth. You know, it says all thoughts produce form at some level. And so mind goes forth. Thoughts create. And so you can either use that law to experience abundance, keeping what you want to keep because you've been given it, or you're going to use that law of mind and extension for deprivation, which means I'm going to project what I don't want, you know, thinking that I'm experiencing, now I'm going to experience scarcity.
And I'm thinking that I'm separate, obviously, from this person. If I can throw onto them attack or guilt, whatever.
Exactly.
Because we're separate.
The ego really believes that we can give conflict away, projection and blame, and actually get rid of it. That's how crazy the ego is. That's how crazy the ego is. The ego is so insane. It's like, if I can just blame them for this, I'll be free of it and I'll feel innocent. If I could just make them really guilty for it, I'll be totally innocent about it because they're the ones who'll be guilty and not me. And that's how insane our ego is. And that's how insane we are when we're identifying with or using the ego. We will be thinking, ooh, this feeling I don't like, if I could just blame it on them, I'll get rid of it and they'll have it, right? And that's how insane the ego is, and that's because we don't realize that you don't get rid of something by blaming it onto somebody. You do not get rid of something by projecting it or blaming it onto somebody else. Yeah. You think we know that by now. It should be obvious. It is obvious, but... You're
trying to make the record straight by attacking your friend or your partner, not realizing that the very fact that you're attacking them, and then whatever you're attacking them with, if it's going to be guilt, then literally you're going to get an attack of guilt back in some form.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the story that they did.
Right.
But in some form, it's going to come back. And if the truth be known, they're just showing you anyway something that you need to deal with.
Right.
And that you and this person share that same issue, that same thing that you're trying to work through together. And what better way to do it than two people come and do a project together?
Right.
And that's what they're there for. And so you both got to see if you can work your way through it without attack and condemnation and guilt, knowing that it's not just because it's not nice to do it to the other person. It's not nice to do it to yourself.
Exactly.
Because that's what you're doing. That's what the Course is really trying to shake us and grab us and get us to understand. You're doing this to yourself. That's why it says you're not a victim of the world you see. Because you're doing it to yourself and you're doing it in the preservation. This whole idea of the ego thinks it can give and not receive back. That's where the ego is insane.
Yes.
And if you had two characters in a movie, like you and I standing next to us, and you're the good one and I'm the silly one, and the good one is looking over at the silly one, and the silly one picks up a hammer and looks at themselves in the mirror and then hits themselves. And they know it's the only way they can hit the one in the mirror is by hitting themselves. And they're willing to hit themselves so that they can see that they've hit the person in the mirror. And then the other one's standing there going, why would they do that? Thinking that they can do something to the one in the mirror, which is themselves, the other, and not be doing it to themselves.
That's right.
And the loving one trying to demonstrate would be sitting there only demonstrating, giving away what they want to experience. I want to receive happiness. I want to receive laughter. So give laughter. I want to receive joy. And the Spirit knows that is the way Creator uses the law, because the Creator came up with the law. Established the law.
Created us by that
It's
law.
not a stupid law. It's a great law if it's applied properly. And what are we going to use the law for? We're going to use it for we think we can give stuff away
that we don't want
and not get back. Because that's what that law believes in, but it's a broken law because it leaves out the part of the getting back part. The other law recognizes the full circle of love's operation of extending. That's how you extend. I'm giving to myself. How much do I love myself? Well, I'm going to see in this act of whatever I'm getting ready to give. That's how much I love myself. Oh, wow, you're attacking yourself. Yeah, I don't think I'm worth happiness. I don't think I'm worth joy. Why? Because I'm demonstrating it by the way I'm treating others. That's the demonstration of my inward belief about myself. And when I start believing, I'm worthy of happiness, then I'm going to tap into the law that says, okay, well, if you know that you know that you know that what you give, you get, it's just it's an automatic.
It's a boomerang.
It's a boomerang, automatic. It's like a trampoline. The tapestry of perception is a trampoline.
Exactly.
And whatever you throw out at perception to the trampoline bounces right back at your experience.
That's right, in your life.
And your experience becomes your new perception. But the ego sits there going, come on, let's get rid of this guilt. We feel guilty, let's get rid of it. Let's attack that person with guilt. That'll make us feel better about ourselves. And, and they deserve it.
Exactly.
And they're an idiot.
And I'm innocent by comparison.
I would never do that.
I would never do that, nor have I ever done that.
And we're not one. We're not connected. We're not joined.
So I can give something to them and be free of it myself.
We're not the same.
Right.
And so you think you demonstrate it by giving them something that you clearly know you don't want that. That's doing the universal, applying it in the universal law of the way the ego has taken the concept but broke it in the middle. Knowing it's going to come back to you, but doesn't tell you that part.
The ego knows.
It just convinces you that you're
you're
winning by giving them a tap.
Exactly.
It doesn't tell you the other part, but you're going to lose when that attack comes back.
Yeah, the ego leaves out that part.
Yeah.
Right.
The ego's a bad psychiatrist, baby. That's why you're a good psychiatrist.
Yes, exactly. The ego is a swindler.
Yeah.
The ego is
abusive swindler.
An abusive swindler where, it's like, where the ego's like, here, I will enable you to get rid of all that you don't like and be free of it by just projecting it on somebody else and blaming it. And then you'll be free of it and you'll feel innocent. And we go, okay. And so we give all of our guilt and anger and all the stuff we don't like about ourselves. We blame it on somebody else, thinking I'm going to feel so much better about myself if they're worse than I am. And then I'm going to be, and then next thing you know, you feel worse.
Right. You
feel like you have more lack in your life than you started out with, and so. So the ego is a demonic salesman, trying to get you to buy into, trying to get you to try to blame and give away all that doesn't feel good, telling you that you'll be free of it, knowing that actually will make it worse for you. So now it says this choice is up to you, how you apply. So how you apply this law of mind, that choice is up to you, but it's not up to you to decide whether or not you're going to utilize this law of mind.
Because you're always going to be giving something.
You said your mind's always going to be extending something.
Your mind is always working. Even when you sleep, that's why you have dreams. Your mind doesn't stop.
Is that exactly
Your mind doesn't sleep. Your mind's eternal.
And every mind must project or extend. Why? Because extension or projection is how the mind lives, and every mind is life. So, you know, your mind's gonna be extending. And the only question is whether your mind's gonna be extending or projecting. But either way, the going forth of your mind is how your mind lives.
Right.
Okay? And every mind is life.
Okay. And it can't help but do that.
Exactly. So, you know, so it's just a question of how do you want to use that law of mind, which is mind will be extending. It will be going forth. Are you going to extend from your mind in order to keep the good that you value? Or are you going to use your mind to try to get rid of what you don't like in yourself, thinking that you're getting rid of it? Okay. So that was one paragraph.
Irene says the ego is a demonic salesman. Yeah. You can picture him ringing your doorbell right now. Even though you put no solicitation for guilt or attack, it still rings your doorbell.
Yeah, just like
you're like, can't you read my sign? No solicitation for guilt or attack. It's like, oh, but this is in your best interest, Irene.
Exactly.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't so important.
Exactly. And the ego is a junkie. The ego is a conflict junkie.
Conflict junkie.
And so the ego can't help but try to get its fix through you projecting blame, projecting anger, in order thinking that you're going to get rid of the feelings you don't like. Okay, the ego is a conflict junkie who doesn't care how it hurts you. Ego don't care, just like a junkie. They don't care if it hurts you that they steal your money. You know, the ego don't care that it hurts you, just like a junkie don't care that it hurts you that it steals your money to go get its fix.
In the real world, you and I are educated and smart enough that if a junkie showed up at our door and said, I need a fix, I need a fix.
Let me in your house so I can rob you.
Let me come in, give me something. And
let me in so I can rob you.
And the ego's fix at your doorbell at your house is it needs that heroin called guilt or attack.
Conflict.
And it needs you to give it to it.
That's right.
And you can only give it to it if you find somebody else
to blame,
to have some guilt and attack with. That's how you feed the junkie.
That's right.
And now imagine the junkie going, oh, thank you. Oh, I thought I was going to die there if I didn't get that guilt extended. Woo, woo. Oh, thank you, Greg. Oh, boy. You have been so loving,
grateful.
So loving to every time I need to attack somebody. You were there for me. Thank you. You've been keeping me going for so long, brother. Thank you.
But then an hour passes and ding dong, here it comes again.
For you.
Yeah. I need another fix.
Because you gave it out, and now it's coming for you.
Exactly.
Because you're getting back what you gave. It's not a punishment.
No.
It's
just a law.
It's a universal law established because it works so well. And it makes so much sense that you would want to only give knowing that you're only going to get back what you gave. So with that knowing, with that knowledge, who would ever put somebody in a torture chamber knowing that they're putting only themselves in that torture chamber?
Right.
You would only hand yourself flowers.
Yes.
You would only hand yourself something good to drink, nice to wear.
Yes.
You would only do these things because you finally came to the knowledge and the understanding and the acceptance that this is true.
Yes, exactly.
And the truth is true, that I get back what I give.
Exactly. And so I like Robert's question. He says, what if we're both full of that guilt and both projecting that guilt? That's a fantastic question, Robert. And so if both people are projecting that anger, that blame, trying to get rid of that guilt that they feel, thinking that once they put it on the other person, they'll feel innocent again, then they both still really want it. Yeah, they both have they both still are conflict junkies. They're both still siding and identifying with their egos. They both are wanting the conflict equally. Okay, they both want to keep that conflict going equally. But one time when one person says, every time I blame them and give them more guilt, I don't feel better, and so I'm going to stop doing that. Now it's possible for the other person and both of them to finally start experiencing something besides conflict. So it starts with one person who decides, I'm going to stop giving the conflict and the blame and the guilt because I don't want it in my mind anymore. It hurts too much. And now the other person now you've given the other person a demonstration. You've given the other person a gift. And so now there's a better chance that the other person will go, I think I'd like to stop giving guilt and keeping conflict also.
And you're giving that person a contrast. Because when you don't fight back, when you don't feed the conflict, even though you feel like you have every right to and you need to defend yourself, if you don't, you're just going to get ran over. You're going to get mopped over like a wet mop and all of that. But again, the course is about reversing the process of how we've been doing it.
Breaking the cycle.
We've been doing it that old way because it always made sense to do it that way. Yes. It doesn't make sense at first to do it the new way where you, as Anna has said a million times, are the first of the two to be the more saner.
Whoever's sane.
It doesn't mean you're sane. It just means you're more saner because you have come to a point where you no longer desire conflict.
For yourself.
Right. You want peace.
Right.
And that willingness right there is the stage that can break the curse on both of you because now they don't have a partner to play tennis with.
That's right.
They're just hitting the balls of conflict over and you're not hitting them back. And when they don't get the balls of conflict hit back at them, and then the next morning, the next day, they realize because they rehearsed that conversation where they were doing most of the talking, that one.
Yep.
And the next day they rehearse that in their mind, and they realize what felt good though wasn't that they got that off their chest, but that they weren't attacked.
Back.
And then that gives hope that they might recognize that and that, well, I should give that then. Right. Because that experience felt better. And if that doesn't work, the fact that you're not giving them agreement to the conflict,
you're not blaming
they
them.
Go on to somebody else.
Exactly.
Because
and you'll receive what you give.
Because they have some conflict they need to get out that they're dealing with within themselves.
Exactly.
Not about you.
That's right.
And so they will find somebody else to war with and to try to give that out that they think they're not going to get back.
Right.
But for you and your household, you yourself, your job is to accept the undoingment for yourself, which is the conflict, so that you can end the cycle for you, for it to keep coming back to you. Because you're tired of preserving it in your experience. So don't give it. That needs to be at the front of our mind in the conflict, not, well, when they change, I'll change.
When they stop.
Well, when they apologize, I'll stop the conflict.
Or when they stop blaming me, then I'll stop blaming them.
Yeah.
When they stop giving me guilt, I'll stop giving them guilt. It doesn't work like that.
We're always waiting for the other, and then of course it would make sense that I can do my part after they've done what I think they should do.
Exactly.
On their part.
Right.
But we don't realize, truly, the Course is handing us like some nuclear weapons here. Like
for peace.
Yeah, for our peace.
Right, for our peace.
For our peace.
Right.
You know, we're not a victim of the world we see, but we're also our own savior. Mm-hmm. We don't need a savior to show up. You are your savior.
That's right.
And you've been given the tools of heaven to save your butt anytime your butt gets knocked down in the trenches. Mm-hmm. You don't need to send a flare-up. You just need to send a flare-up in your mind reminding you what to do now.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, I don't like this conflict.
I don't like the conflict.
I hate this conflict.
Like Robert said, 1,000%, it's exhausting.
It is.
It's so exhausting. Man. And it doesn't produce any kind of peace or resolution. It's never like, you blame somebody for what you don't like, the feelings you don't like, you blame them. It never happens that the other person goes, "You're so right. Thank you so much. Thank you for showing me that.
I really am an idiot.
I really am an idiot. And I'm so grateful that you revealed this to me." And then you feel better. It never produces any kind of better feeling or resolution when you blame somebody.
Even if they did do that, you're not an idiot.
Exactly.
You would immediately feel horrible.
Exactly. I love it. And Demi says, it's so draining. I try to crack a joke, but some prefer conflict to avoid intimacy and self-reflection. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Remember, the ego is a conflict junkie. And so the ego wants nothing more than to keep conflict going. That's all the ego wants, right? And so when there are some people where, let's say, you've decided that you only want to give love because that's all you want to experience because you're tired of you're exhausted by all the conflict, and you extend love and they reject it because they're still a conflict junkie, right? But that doesn't matter because, like Greg was saying, if you decide I'm only going to extend love because that's all I want in my mind because I'm tired, then one way or another, that is what will come back to you. Whether it's through this person or that person or from your own mind or from the universe, it don't matter. You will receive what you're giving, whether that person accepts that and wants love also. It don't matter. And then Demi says the jealousy is usually the reason. Right. Exactly. That jealousy is an expression of an addiction to conflict. Right. So jealousy is a projection. Right. And so it's just another way that the conflict junkie called the ego is trying to give away some blame in order to keep its habit fed. Mm-hmm. So, okay, great. So this is beautiful. This is wonderful. Okay, so then
I love it because it's so helpful, isn't it?
I mean, what could be more practical than what we're talking about for relationships?
Yeah, and our daily lives in general.
Exactly.
Is recognizing how much conflict we're tempted with.
Yes.
And it's like all these drug sellers on every corner tempting us with some conflict. Yeah. Hey, you want some conflict?
The ego is
I want some conflict.
The ego is a drug pusher, and the ego is pushing the drug of conflict because the ego needs conflict to stay alive.
Right.
And remember, the ego got to use you to get its fix. And how do you like that idea of being used by the ego? For the ego to get its fix, which is conflict. How do you like the feeling of being used like that? I don't. Do you like the feeling of having a tick being on you and using you by sucking your blood so that the tick can stay alive? Do you like the feeling of having a tick on you?
And what does that
sucking your blood stay alive?
And what does that tick produce in your experience? Mm-hmm. It produces anger. Mm-hmm. Hate, rage, malice,
sickness,
upset, grievances,
sickness,
all of the things. When you look at your life and you say, "Man, I got so much drama going on."
Oh man, or sickness.
Well, then you know that that's coming from the result of giving some conflict somehow.
Right.
So I need to reel that in. And like Anna said, you don't have to go on a 6-month sabbatical to figure out how to fix all the conflict.
Right.
You can literally just come to Spirit and say, you know, that's the past, and I want to come to the present.
And I'm going to choose again.
The present gives you the opportunity. It's almost like some kind of magical miracle.
At the holy instant, it's a magic instant eraser.
Right. It's a big eraser board of the past of all your wrong errors, all your wrong decisions. It's like standing before the God of heaven, where God said, "Your errors are erased," and you're like, "You can do that? Yes, I am God." So stand before me and know that we can choose again
at any moment.
And you go, "How do I do that, oh great one?" And the great one says, "Do it like I do." The way I do is I only give what I want to receive back. Why would I give conflict when that is not what I want? I say I don't want conflict, but yet I give conflict. That is being a hypocrite.
Yes.
That is saying one thing and doing something else. That's the definition of a hypocrite.
That's right.
So you can erase it right now and change the tide by giving no conflict.
Exactly.
And in that situation that he was talking about, where you're both in it, and we know that one. Everybody knows that one.
Everybody knows that one.
You know, it seems reasonable to just say to yourself, "What do I want?"
Exactly. Forget about what they did.
And as you lead yourself out of the desert, of not giving back anything that you don't want to receive.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't do that. And as you walk out of the desert into the promised land because of your demonstration, your action, now the other one can decide if that's what they want.
Right, exactly.
You know?
That's right. And by your example, maybe they will choose the same.
Yeah.
You know, because they see you doing it and they see you getting more peaceful, happier, more abundant and healthier. You know, maybe they go, let's see, he's not attacking me back. He's not fighting anymore. And he's getting happier and more abundant. Right? Maybe I'll do the same.
Seem to be at peace a lot more when having given up conflict. I notice he gave up conflict. He just doesn't.
He's not fighting back. He's not fighting.
He lets people be right when they insist on being right, and he says he can see how they
might feel that way,
or see that way from that vantage point. That makes sense. And then he just seems so peaceful. Why is he whistling in the kitchen?
Why is he having so much fun? And
why is he giggling and laughing like some little kid all the time?
Yes. Oh, and why is more abundance flowing into his life?
Like he did was stop giving up that conflict.
He stopped fighting.
Yeah.
He stopped fighting back.
Being conflict bitch.
Yes.
Conflict little slave.
Yes.
Prisoner.
Yes.
You know, I was talking to Aria, Anna's daughter's significant other,
Jace.
her boyfriend Jace, and he asked me how I gave up smoking. And I told him because I realized that cigarettes literally had made me their slave, their bitch.
Right.
For me, it was literally the feeling of I'm its bitch.
Yes.
And that felt so humiliating, so dirty, so unwanting. I didn't want to be anything or anybody's bitch. And to be a pack of cigarettes that's not even alive, it's not even real, it's not even making a decision to make me its bitch. I've made the decision to make me its bitch, and it's not even alive. That's so pathetic of a story.
That's pathetic.
And I told him when I realized that it gave me all the courage, all the power, all the motivation in the world to not allow that to continue. And that's how this whole thing is we're going to sit here going, I am sick and tired of being conflict bitch.
Yes.
But you have to realize what's making it happen.
Right.
For me, it was, I can't take another puff off of another cigarette again because if I do, it got me again. And in this other story, I can't be violated by accepting the idea of giving something that I wouldn't get back as an idea anymore. I have to know in every giving act, every giving moment, that I am only giving unto myself. I'm only receiving as I'm producing right now.
That's the law of mind.
It's the law of mind.
The law of mind.
And when I get to that, I am not the ego's bitch anymore, because I'm not using the law anymore the way that God established it, which is not for conflict, but to extend love, knowing that if I give love, I'm only going to give love back. If I give love, I'm preserving love. If I give love, I'm extending it, because not only did you get it, but it's always going to come back to me. So there's the extension. Not just me giving, but assurance, and it's further extension by coming back to me. And the ego has taken that universal law and says, I'm going to make something totally messed up with that.
Exactly.
I'm going to pollute your lungs with this. And then you say, you know what? I quit.
Exactly. And then tell them what you did with the pack of cigarettes.
So I set the pack of cigarettes on my nightstand right next to my bed. And every day that I came home, I sat on my bed, taking off my clothes, getting ready for bed, staring at it, as if we were in a prison cell together.
Exactly.
And in my mind, I would talk to it. I wouldn't talk out loud.
Like, I'm never going to be your bitch again.
And I'd be like, all those temptations I had of you today, look it. I didn't buy one cigarette. Every time you talked to me today, I didn't listen to you one time. Every time. And now look it. I'm sitting on my bed, I'm getting ready for bed, and I'm looking at you, and I won't even touch you. I won't even give you the satisfaction of being smoked.
Very good.
Of what you were made for. You're not even going to be able to do what you were made for, to be smoked.
And that exact attitude is the attitude now that we're going to be expressing to our egos, our addiction to attack. Imagine that pack of cigarette is our addiction to attack, our addiction to anger and projecting and blaming. You know, you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
Because I
You're not going to control me.
Because I realized, right, that I was under its control.
Yes.
Because I kept trying to quit. And then every time I smoked one time again, it would be like, I'll just finish this pack.
Exactly.
But I'll still stay quit.
Right.
And then, I smoked that pack. One more is not going to hurt.
Exactly.
And the next thing you know, you're fully smoking again.
Yes.
So I knew that I couldn't smoke one more time, and that's where the Course is trying to get us to, is to actually come to a place where we quit, where we no longer allow ourselves to give anything, especially conflict, that we don't want back. I don't want to give judgment, because I know somehow I'm so becoming aware of this in our lives, in my life, that I'm going to get judgment back. Now, does that mean that I have stopped judging? Heck no.
Not yet.
But I'll tell you what, I'm way less judgmental than I was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago. Because I'm getting quicker at the remembering what I want and what I don't want.
And the laws of mind. You know, very good. Beautiful. That's a perfect story for this. We love it. And I'm so glad you told Jace that story. That's great.
Yeah.
He cracked up.
It was so funny. It's like, so you sat on your bed in a prison cell with your cigarette, telling the cigarette how it was your bitch before you went to bed. And I go, yeah, I'm the same thing when I woke up in the morning. I'd look at it, sit up in bed, and just stare at it for a while before I left. But I know you're going to be talking to me again. And when you do, you're going to get the same answer I keep giving over and over. All right? I don't sleep with cigarettes. I told you that last night. I'll tell you again this morning. You are not going to violate me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if I'm in here. And that was 2001. 2001.
Wow.
So here we are all these years later. And why does it still work? Because I still apply the principles. I don't need the pack no longer by my bedside.
Right.
It's not a temptation anymore to me because I went through the valley of the shadow of death.
Right.
And I dealt with my demons. And which was in this story tonight, conflict.
Yes.
And now we're going to learn to put that box of conflict on our nightstand, and we're going to look at it and go, you were talking to me all day long. You were tempting me. But not one time did I snuff you.
Exactly.
Not one time did I inject you into my veins again. I'm quitting. I'm done with you.
Beautiful. I love it. Bridget says, me too, better than I was. And Diana also says, judging less than I did. Very good.
Love it.
And I love it. Demi says, whistling, humming, inner light for a no bitch life. That's beautiful. Sounds like a song.
Yeah, it is.
I love it. Okay. And so in paragraph 2, what it says is, so our conflict junkies' use of projection must be fully understood before the inevitable association between this law and anger can be finally unmade. So in other words, before we let go of anger, before we let go of it, we've got to, the ego's use of projection must be fully understood, okay? Before the inevitable association between projection and anger can finally be unmade, okay? So right now, there's a complete and total connection and association between projection and anger. So all anger is a projection. And what do we do with our anger? We project it. With, like, you know, who likes the feeling of anger? It doesn't feel good. But what do we do with it? I'm going to blame this anger. I'm going to project this anger, and then I'll feel better. I won't feel angry anymore. Once I blame somebody and project it, I won't feel angry anymore. But does that ever work?
That has not one
time.
Not one time in the history of ever.
Not one.
Of time.
Ever.
Has that worked.
Ever.
Where I'm angry. And we don't ever stop to think about that. That, okay, so I gave you some of my anger.
Yes. You blamed your anger.
I gave you some of my mind.
Yes.
My peace of mind.
Oh
boy, I gave her a piece of my mind.
Not your
but
piece of mind.
But it wasn't any peace. It was just a piece of my mind.
Right.
And it was angry.
Yeah.
And I thought that, and now you're angry.
Yes.
So now you're angry, now we're both angry.
Right. And now I'm going to blame my anger and project my anger on you, thinking, once I blame you for my anger, thinking, I'll feel better, I'll get rid of
your anger that you just got from me. And it's like throwing sicknesses on each other. And we can't get rid of them because we're trying to throw them on each other. And you only get rid of them by throwing something else on it.
The opposite, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so until we understand how our ego uses projection and blame, then we will never be able to break the association between anger and projection. So we got to learn that projection and anger always go together. You know, whenever you are angry, you're blaming, you're projecting, right? And what is it saying here? It's saying that you never get rid of your anger by blaming it on somebody. Name one time ever where you blame somebody for your anger and then there was no more anger. You were like, oh, thank you for taking my blame. I feel so much better. Now I only have love for you. That never, ever, ever works. And so if you ever want And that's what it is. You know, anger doesn't feel good. And the ego tells you, oh, the best way to get rid of what doesn't feel good is to blame it on somebody else.
But that's like the devil of devils.
Exactly. And
Lucifer himself is down there going, knowing that by you giving this anger away,
you're going to keep it.
That you are going to keep it.
And
even if it doesn't come back to you through that person, like they just walk off peacefully
and you
from
never
you.
see them again. Right.
And it doesn't matter. The Lucifer of the ego world knows, sitting there going,
all right, we preserved conflict.
Knows you preserved it.
Yeah.
It's like you made a little infant baby of anger, and it will be delivered by some stork somewhere. It's coming your way.
That's right, exactly. And that's because the ego always tries to preserve conflict. That's all the ego's ever doing, is trying to keep the conflict going. And the ego knows that you can only preserve your conflict if you blame your anger on somebody else.
If you give it,
you're gonna keep it. You're gonna keep it. And so the ego only has one need, and that is to preserve conflict. The ego always tries to preserve conflict, and the ego is very ingenious in devising ways which seem to diminish the conflict only because the ego does not want you to find the conflict so intolerable that you will insist on giving the conflict up. So the ego is a conflict junkie. It always is trying to preserve conflict. In other words, the ego does not want you to give conflict up, okay? But your ego knows that also that conflict feels uncomfortable. And so the ego has extremely ingenious ways of seeming to diminish the discomfort of the conflict, so that you won't go, this hurts, I'm done with you, conflict, I'm giving you up. So the ego can't allow you to give up the conflict, which is the ego's lifeblood. So the ego ingeniously devises ways that seem to diminish the conflict. Like, for instance, the ego's like, well, just don't talk about it anymore. Or just separate for a while. Or just pretend like you don't feel angry. Or just don't say anything about it. And that will diminish the conflict. You won't feel as uncomfortable, and then you won't think to give conflict up. And so that's what the ego is all about. That's what the ego is always trying to diminish the conflict, so you don't really feel the discomfort of it, even though it's still there. So the ego's like, oh, here's a way to suppress it. Here's a way to repress it. Here's a way to numb yourself out.
And everybody in the room can still feel
exactly.
The conflict hasn't gone away.
Yes.
It's just another way. That's why it says in parentheses, in italicized, seems to diminish the conflict. The conflict hasn't been diminished because it's still in your mind.
That's right.
As long as it's in your mind, what you're harboring is a dangerous
enemy.
Shark.
Yes.
I've been watching all these shark videos and how when a shark attacks, it's so freaking vicious.
Yes.
It's just like
no mercy.
Ferocious.
No mercy.
Just tearing apart its enemy, and that's how the ego is with us.
Yes.
And the way that it attacks us, that ferocious, is it convinces us that we're separated from the giving process.
Right.
And that we're gonna be okay, but we're not.
Right.
It's gonna come back full circle back to us, and that's why it says the ego always tries to preserve conflict.
Right.
And it's ingenious and doing what I was getting to seems to diminish it, but because it's still in our minds, we still think there's a problem. And that we need to defend, that we need to argue, we need to fight. And it's looping in our mind. It's not, it needs to get out of our mind that there's a conflict.
Exactly. It needs to numb or dull the feeling of the discomfort of the conflict. So like an example, like in our relationship where, and you know, my ego would be like, hey, listen, I know that the conflict doesn't feel good at all, which it doesn't. But instead of you being like, I don't want this conflict, I think I'm going to forgive and give only love. So the ego says, well, just don't talk about it. Just go, don't talk about it. Like, forget about it. Or
yeah, be the bigger person and just let them have their space and don't talk about
exactly.
it. Be the bigger, the more loving person like that.
Or,
and then they've given you your space because that's what you gave.
Right.
And then you think that they're doing it. That's why we always come back and say the same thing. No, you are doing it.
Exactly.
Because we're both getting back what we're both getting, and then we act surprised that they're saying that we were doing it.
Exactly. And another way that the ego ingeniously devises so that you don't feel the conflict, so that you don't give it up, is the ego says, well, instead of giving up the conflict and deciding to just extend love, just go eat some food or go drink some alcohol, anything to numb out the discomfort of the feeling of attack. Because remember, the ego is very ingenious in devising ways which seem to diminish the conflict, where we go into denial or go numb, only because the ego does not want you to find the conflict so intolerable that you insist on giving up the conflict and extending love. Okay? So the ego doesn't want you to go, this hurts. This doesn't feel good. Oh, and by the way, I'm doing it to myself. I think I'll just start giving some love so that I can feel better. The ego does not want you to do that. So it says this discomfort can be healed or, diminished by you numbing out or projecting it or suppressing or repressing it or just pretending it's not there. Okay? The ego is very ingenious about ways to numb out and suppress and repress instead of really feel how bad conflict really feels and make that decision to, like Greg did with the cigarettes. I'm not smoking you anymore. I'm not going to give more conflict. I'm not going to use you conflict anymore because it hurts me. Right. And so it says, therefore, and in the ego's very ingenious desire to give you ways to diminish your conflict so you don't think to give it up, the ego tries to persuade you that the ego can free you of your conflict lest you give up your conflict and free yourself from conflict. Okay? So the ego's like, you don't need to give up conflict. I'll give you ways to diminish your conflict. Oh, you don't need to give it up. You don't need to give up your conflict. I'll give you ways to numb it out or pretend it's not there. Mm-hmm. And the ego is very ingenious about devising ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And so the ego, using the ego's own warped version of the laws of mind, the ego uses the power of mind only to defeat your mind's real purpose, which is extension of love. And how does it do that? How does the ego do that? How does the ego use its own warped version of the laws of the mind to defeat the mind's own real purpose, which is extending love? Well, here's how it does it. The ego projects the conflict from your mind to other minds in an attempt to persuade you that you've gotten rid of your conflict. That's how it does it. What does it do? It persuades you to project your conflict from your mind to their mind, where you go like, I'm not the one who has a problem. You are the problem. You are the reason I don't feel good. I'm not the one generating this conflict. This conflict isn't coming from my mind. It's coming from your mind, right? You are the reason I'm angry. You are the reason I'm upset. You are the reason I am hurt. And that's how the ego is ingeniously devising a way for you to get rid of your conflict instead of giving it up. Mm-hmm. All right. And this ingenious device the ego is using has a number of lies, which may not be so apparent in that process, that ego cell is just full of lies. Ego is full of failures, full of lies. When the ego says, hey, if you don't like the conflict that you're feeling, just project it onto somebody else and you'll get rid of it. That is a proposal that's full of lies. Full of lies.
It's like this road. You don't like your car, get rid of it. Mm-hmm. You don't like your dog, get rid of it. You don't like your relationship, get rid of it. And the ego convinces us you don't like that anger, get rid of it.
Project it, blame it.
And not what it says here. With that concept, there's some fallacies, there's some failures to that system. Mm-hmm. The system breaks down because, oops, now I got what I gave.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Dang.
Exactly.
That's a sucky system. Well, it's not when I realize, mm-hmm. I actually can be in control of it. I'm going to get what I want.
Exactly. And so the lie that the ego is always selling, because remember the ego is a demonic salesman. And so the lie that the ego conflict junkie is always selling you, so ingeniously, is this, hey, you can get rid of something you don't want by giving it away.
Yeah. You don't have to keep it. It won't come back.
That's
right.
Don't
worry about
exactly. That. You just give that, or just blame that on somebody else, and then it'll be gone. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that awesome? And that is the lie that the conflict junkie, demonic salesman ego is always trying to sell you.
And you're only helping them to tell them what nobody else will, which is that they're an idiot.
Exactly. That's right. Now, it says, first, strictly speaking, conflict cannot be given to another. You can't give it away. You can't give conflict away to another. Isn't that hilarious? When you hear it saying it, you're like, that's hilarious. Like, that's this dumbest thing ever, the thought that I can give conflict away to another and actually be rid of it. That's the dumbest thing you ever heard. But we do it as if it's real, as if it's possible, as if it's possible.
So we obviously believe it because we're always engaging in conflict.
Exactly. And we're always blaming our conflict on somebody else, never noticing that it doesn't ever work. It doesn't ever really make you feel better. You know, it doesn't really get rid of your conflict. All right. Thank you for sharing that, Gregory.
Thank you.
Yes, its job is to defend the myth, the self is real, so that now can pretend to have real people in it. Isn't mind brilliant? Yes, it is. The ego is ingenious. Okay, our mind, as our mind was created by God, is brilliant. The ego is only merely ingenious. Okay, but there's a big difference between ingeniousness and true wisdom and true brilliance. Okay, so. That's, strictly speaking, you can't give your conflict away to another why? Because precisely conflict cannot be fully shared. Right. You can't give your conflict away and be rid of it.
They don't have to accept your conflict.
Exactly.
They don't have to join you in your conflict.
And they won't. When was the last time you tried to blame your conflict on somebody else and they said, oh, thank you. I share that with you. I agree with you. Like, when does that happen? No. When you're sharing your anger, who says, oh, I join with you in that. I share that with you. When you're sharing you're giving away your conflict and you're sharing your anger, all that happens is people go, oh yeah, it was you. Nobody shares in your conflict, your projection, your blame. Conflict cannot be shared. In other words, nobody's going to agree with you that they are the reason why they're not going to say, oh, I share that projection of blame with you. Thank you. And so any attempt to keep part of that conflict and get rid of another part of that conflict does not really mean anything. So, in other words, so the idea there to remember is conflict cannot be given to another. You can't share it with another. You can't give your conflict away to another and get rid of it. Okay. All right. Beautiful. Like we were saying, it's so obvious, but until you hear it, you don't go, oh, that's obvious. That is true.
And when we're out in the lab,
yes,
out in the world that we created, it's challenging, but it's our work to remember this stuff. But of course, it's challenging in the middle of what seems like a developed conflict, not to react as if I'm going to give out conflict.
Right.
You know, to catch myself in the moment of wanting to give that is where the work comes in.
Right.
That's where the real
practice.
Yes. And it's going to reflect our true desire to awaken from this ugly dream of keeping a conflict preserved.
Right.
Let's keep the preservation of all this conflict we've had, this like a preservation land, you know. Let's not bring anything in here that would kill the conflict, like love or innocence, or, you know, or let's get rid of it. And once again, the Course gives us the exact path how to get there.
Exactly. And what I'm being shown in my mind right now is when you're experiencing conflict, and let's say you're experiencing some conflict in your relationship, there's one way of expressing that you're in conflict without trying to give it away and project on them is you could say to the people, somebody that you're in a relationship, you could say, I am giving myself so much conflict right now. I'm giving myself so much anger, and I'm giving myself so much hurt right now. And this is what I'm doing to myself right now. Okay, now you're not like pretending that you're not experiencing conflict, but you're not trying to give it away. You're actually taking responsibility for it. I'm in conflict and I am giving it to myself. Honey, this is the conflict that I am giving to myself today. That I really don't want anymore because it doesn't feel good. Right? And you're not making me feel this way. My ego would love to see it like you're making me feel this way because my ego wants me to keep my conflict. But the truth is that I am giving myself this conflict because my ego right now is a junkie going in withdrawal. And
feeling threatened.
My ego has been feeling really threatened by all the peace we've been having. So my conflict junkie within me is going into withdrawals, and it's screaming in my head that I need to give away the conflict and blame the conflict on you know, so that my conflict junkie can get its fix. And so that's what's happening inside me right now, sweetie.
Yeah.
And then, of course, your partner's going to go...
Don't be afraid of me when you go to sleep.
Exactly. And so now, you weren't in denial or pretending that your ego wasn't giving you conflict. You know, you just are telling the truth about the conflict. You're not trying to give the conflict away in the belief that you'll get relief from your conflict. Okay. So
I love this toward the end of 3 here where it says, remember that a conflict teacher, now we know what a conflict teacher is.
A conflicted teacher.
Yeah. Conflicted teacher is a conflict teacher.
Yes, right.
They teach conflict.
Yes.
That's what a conflicted teacher is they're conflicted because they're confused about what they want.
Yes, exactly. And they're confused about how to keep something in their, you know.
So remember that a conflict teacher, a conflicted teacher, is a poor teacher to who themselves. and therefore a poor learner.
Yes.
They're a poor learner because they haven't yet graduated at least to the level of knowing as I give, I keep.
Right.
Whatever I extend, I join in the receiving of that extension.
Exactly. And so a conflicted teacher is going to be somebody who's giving away something they don't really want.
Yeah, that's retarded.
That's conflicted. Wait, why? You're obviously conflicted. You're going to give away to somebody what you don't want to keep yourself? That you're obviously conflicted.
Yeah.
I see that you're conflicted. And which means what you're going to be learning is confused. And then the transfer value of your lessons is going to be severely limited by your confusion. Okay, so when you're giving something that you don't want, then all your lessons are going to be very confusing and very conflicted. Same thing. You know, you're going to be a poor learner, you're going to be a poor teacher. And so your lessons in life are only going to be clear and make sense and be helpful when you are not giving mixed messages. When you give something to somebody you don't really want yourself, when you're trying to give away something that you don't want, thinking you're getting rid of it, literally, all you're going to experience is confusing lessons.
Yeah, you're confused because you want peace, right, but you're giving away war.
Exactly.
And then war comes back to you. Like I said, it doesn't have to come back through the same channel that you gave it.
Right.
But it's coming back unless you break the curse.
Unless you break the cycle.
You can break it.
That's right.
You can do it right now.
That's right.
You don't have to wait.
That's
That'd
right.
probably be a good thing if you wouldn't mind helping us in a guided meditation on. You can break whatever errors and mistakes that you've done, that we've done in the past, can be broken. That's what a miracle is.
That's what a miracle is.
A miracle has the power to break our errors, to break our mistakes, and to start anew, to start afresh.
Holy instant. Every instant is a new instant, truly. And so, and I'm just seeing that, I see how we do it in our relationships where it's like, well, I only want peace and love, but they are the ones who are,
they're the problem.
Not realizing that I only want peace and love, but not realizing that I'm also blaming, right? So it's like saying I only want conflict. Right. So saying I only want peace and love and joy, but they are the ones who are, want conflict and attack. I would give only peace and love, but except for them. That's being a conflicted teacher, saying I only want peace and love, but yet you're blaming at the same time. So that's you being a conflicted teacher, and a poor teacher and a poor learner. Okay, and we do it all the time. Like, I only want peace and love, but they don't, and they're the ones who are keeping the conflict going. Okay,
and then our world comes back to us, pointing at us, going,
yes,
they don't want peace, they want only conflict, and they treat us that way, and then we wonder why all this conflict is in our life.
Exactly.
And because we think we can give it and not experience it.
Our ego is trying to teach us that we can give away what we don't want and get rid of it. So the ego, and that's the ego's way of trying to guarantee that we preserve the conflict and intensify it. So,
and if that's what a poor teacher and poor learner is, then we've been called to be rich teachers and rich learners.
Yes.
And the rich teacher, the rich learner is the one that wakes up to, hey, I can not only erase my path, but I can co-create my experience by now projecting out, giving out, extending out what I want back. If I don't want attack back, I'm going to stop giving that. If I don't want hurt back, I'm going to stop hurting. If I don't want condemnation in my life, if I don't want my life to be condemned, I'm going to stop condemning others.
Right.
And then I become a rich teacher and learner because now I start behaving that way. And others around you, I tell you, others around you will start taking note to your life.
Yes.
Because they'll look at your life and they go, wow, look at this person. How come it seems like so much seems to be going right for them? That they seem to be so blissful, so more happy, so more at peace, so less argumentative. They used to argue about everything, now they don't argue about nothing. And without you saying a word, preaching a sermon, doing a talk, you're just demonstrating by your walk. And then sooner or later they put it together. Oh, what it is this person doesn't conflict, they're not conflicted, they're not handing out conflict. And look at their life. Look at their life. And then they can see the contrast. They haven't experienced it yet. But as you start experiencing the contrast, I just told somebody yesterday what we teach is to have a happy life. That's what we're trying to teach people. How to have a happy experience. And how you have a happy experience is by not giving what you don't want. And boy, when you realize, wow, I can be at the captain's helm here with the captain's hat, driving this ship with heaven.
A relationship.
And giving what I want. And receiving back what I want. How wonderful and how simple is that?
So simple. Beautiful. All right, you guys. So there you go.
Well, I didn't give you a chance to finish up. Would you like to
do integration meditation? Sure. All right. Well, let's.
We're a little bit over time.
That's all right.
If you don't have time,
yes.
Don't feel guilty for sticking around. If you do,
that's right.
You're welcome to join us in this.
Yeah. So we're gonna do an integration meditation, which is what I do usually at the end of my classes, where we're gonna take the ideas and use them in your life right now. And Demi says, "Thank you." All right. So let's close our eyes and take a breath. And just breathe and feel. All right. So I want you to bring to your awareness a situation where you were experiencing anger. You're experiencing conflict. So bring that situation, relationship, event, or encounter to your awareness where you were experiencing conflict. Now, I want you to now ask yourself, what do I want right now? What do I want right now? What do I want? Do I want more anger and upset and guilt and grievances? Or do I want peace and love and happiness? What do I want? And take a breath. And tell yourself, whatever it is that I now give to this person or this situation, that is what I am going to be keeping. That's what I'm going to be experiencing. Now I want you to tell yourself also, even if you don't believe it, I want you to tell yourself, this anger is a projection. This anger is my belief that something is being done to me. This anger is a projection. And I want you to tell yourself, giving this conflict away, blaming my conflict on another, is only going to make me keep this conflict and to deepen the pain of it. I want you to tell yourself, I cannot give this conflict away and get rid of it. I can only decide to take full responsibility for the conflict I am experiencing and decide I don't like the feeling of this conflict and decide to give it up. My only relief here from the discomfort of my anger is to decide to give up conflict completely right now. By how? By in this moment not giving away the conflict and blaming the conflict on another, but by extending love or extending gratitude. And so in this situation, in this relationship, I want you to, in this holy instant, decide that all you want to give to this person is love or gratitude or appreciation, because that's all you want to experience yourself. So in your mind, extend to them the idea of appreciation, love, and gratitude. Because that's what you want to keep in your mind. And tell yourself, I'm not going to feed my conflict junkie within me called the ego. I'm not going to feed it by projecting this conflict and blaming this conflict on another. I'm going to stop feeding my conflict junkie within. I'm going to stop preserving the conflict in my own mind by giving and blaming conflict. I'm going to extend only gratitude and appreciation right now, which is how I give up conflict completely. I only want peace. And so in this moment, I am only going to extend peace so that I can free my own mind from conflict once and for all. It's my choice. I have the ability to choose again this holy instant and have a 100% free of conflict, present and future. I only want to preserve peace in my mind, so that's all I'm going to give right now. And to that we say, amen.
Amen.
All right. Yeah, thanks for asking, sweetie. You guys are awesome. You guys are amazing. Thank you. for joining us, joining our healing circle, and strengthening these ideas for you, us, and all the world. Appreciate you so much.
Just say no to the junkie this week.
That's right.
We'll see you guys on next
Sunday.
Love you.
Love you guys.